Something a little bit different today, we are making these crystal sun catchers. So they just look amazing out in the sun, and they both have a loop there for hanging. This one here has slightly smaller wire. The black wire on the top there is an 18 gauge wire. This one here, which is sort of like the one that we're going to make today, the black wire on top there is a 16 gauge wire. And again, hanging from that little hanger on the top. And I just showed you this one here because I've added in a little crescent moon, a wire wrapped crescent moon. So that's just an optional idea. You can attach one of those to yours if you like. So we've got a ruler and some jewelry tools. We've got 3 different sizes of wire. Today we've got 24 gauge, 26 gauge, and then 16 gauge. So we've got a 5-inch round metal circle there. And we've got a whole heap of beads. So for this one here, I'm going to use approximately 50 beads. And the beads I'm using either 8mm or 6mm beads. So I used about 16 of the 8mm beads and about 34 of the 6mm beads. So to start with, we are going to grab our 24 gauge wire. And then just measuring out about 120 centimeters of wire. That will be probably about half of what you will need to do this project, but I just find it's too hard to do it all in one go. The wire just is a bit long and wild, and it's hard to keep it in good condition without it bending or breaking. So we start there by just securing the start of the wire, so just holding it onto the metal circle and wrapping it around a couple of times. So you want to also wrap it over itself as well, and that will help to hold it secure. Just pulling it nice and tight, and when that's nice and secure, you're just going to start by wrapping on a bead. Just make sure you pull your wire all the way out in between each loop as well. So I pop the bead on, and then in between each bead, I like to wrap it 3 times. That makes it kind of look nice and even, and it also makes sure that each bead is on there nice and secure. So there's your bead on, and then you're just going to do your 3 wraps around. So that's 1, bringing your tail all the way through, and this will be number 2, bringing your tail all the way through, and that's number 3. Then you can just continue on with your next bead. With your beads and your sizes, you want to change it up a little bit to have a few different colours and a few different sizes as you go. So mix it up with having dark ones next to light ones, and then a pattern where it's sort of, you've got a few different ones. It's kind of all over the place. I don't have a set pattern. I just do them kind of randomly, but make sure it's balanced-ish, if that makes sense. I just find they kind of look cool if they're a bit more quirky. So I've just added a larger one there. Then I'll put a clear one on. You really want your beads to be in sort of matching or complementary colours in a few different shades. So I've got just different shades of blue. I've got a couple of white and opal and black in there as well, just so this one's going to sort of be the blue one. You want to be a little bit careful too, because wire wrapping, especially when you're dealing with long tails, the wire sometimes has a bit of a mind of its own because it's kind of curled, and so you have to be a little bit careful of your eyes. It can be a little bit wild. So if you're worried at all, maybe just pop some eye protection on, or your glasses. You really don't want to scratch in your eye. And of course you don't want to bend the wire at all or have any tangles. If you bend the wire, and then even if you straighten it out, it's going to have a weak point in the wire there. So just trying to work with the wire in a way that it doesn't bend. So pulling it all the way through each time, and then wrapping your bead on and wrapping it 3 times in between. Same way each time. As you're moving around the circle as well, we are attaching the beads on the inner side of the circle. So as you work your way around, just keep moving those beads so that they're sitting on the inside of the circle. So just keep going around your whole circle there with a mixture of your smaller beads and larger beads, and just pulling them nice and tight in between each one. So you want to just continue all the way around until you've used up that piece of wire that you're using. So I've got a mixture of sodalite, apatite, moonstone, opalite, onyx, which is the black, and clear quartz as well. So I've got quite a nice range of different blues. Just sort of trying to make them, like when you haven't used a light colour one for a while, just pop a light colour on there. This is quite an easy design. It's probably about an intermediate level, but it is actually quite easy to get it looking good. As long as you've got some basic jewellery making sort of wire wrapping skills, you'll be able to make one of these and it will look really good. Alright, so we've come to the end of our first piece of wire there. So just bringing that tail in nice and close to the metal circle. And you're just going to grab your next piece of wire. So with the same size wire, we're just going to keep going. So we've sort of done a little bit under half. So this next piece we will grab about 130 centimeters. We're just going to start again by just wrapping it around this piece and then over itself and also over the last piece of wire, just to secure it all in place. So it can be a little bit fiddly. If you need to, you can use your tools just to hold it nice and tight and crimp it down, pulling your wire all the way through your circle. It's a bit harder to work with when it's so long, but I just find it's easier to not have to reattach your wire all the time. Pulling that all the way through, and when you're sure that it's all on there nice and securely, you're ready to start your next bead. Alright, so now you can just keep going with your design, threading your beads on, and the same thing, 3 wraps in between each bead. So you are going to have the other wire eventually go on top of this wire as well, so that will actually help to hold all your beads on there nice and securely as well. So this is just sort of the first layer of wire to hold all your beads on. So again, just as you're working, just make sure your beads are sitting nicely on the inside. And then we're going to just continue on until we've gone right around the whole circle. When you come to the end of your piece of wire and you've gone right around the middle circle, make sure you pull your wire around nice and tight. Then you can snip your little end piece of tail off and just make sure that's crimped down nice and tight. So, making sure your beads are all sitting nicely on the inside of your circle. And it should look something like this. Now you can put aside your 24 gauge wire and your beads. And now we're going to grab our 16 gauge wire. This is quite a firm wire. Quite thick, but I really like the look of it on the design. So if you do have trouble with the 16 gauge wire, try out an 18 gauge wire. Still looks really cool on the end design as well. Okay, so we start off with just grabbing about 100 centimeters of our 16 gauge wire. So some of you might prefer the look of the thinner wire anyway. So if that's the case, just use an 18 gauge wire. So to start with our wire, we need to just start by attaching it on. So I like to just actually put a little hook in the end of my wire, and I find that makes it easier to grab onto. Putting a little loop on and then just attaching it, then I can hold onto the wire with my pliers. And then just gently wrapping that wire around. It sits in between the beads nicely and holds them in place. Again, being gentle with your wire, you don't want any bends in it. Slowly manipulating that through the bigger hole, and then we want our wire to come across itself, so it's going to kind of hang on. You can do that on nice and tight, then it actually helps to secure the wire on there. So just bringing it around a couple of times and then you can start your wrapping. So a little bit fiddly to get it on, especially because this is the 16 gauge wire. But once it's on there and it's on nice and tight, it's worth it in the end. Okay, so that's attached now, and we're just going to start by working our way around the circle again. This time we don't put any beads on, but we are just going to wrap a little bit inside and outside the circle, and wrapping it in between some of the beads. I don't go in between every bead, I just do it in between some of them. Some I go around one bead, some I go around two, some I go on the inside of the circle and some on the outside. So just paying attention as you go along. You want it to look balanced-ish. About the same amount of inside and outside loops on each side kind of thing, but you'll see as you go. When you've done some on the inside, you need to do another one on the outside, and when you've done a smaller one, you need to probably do a bigger one. So just wrapping in between the beads so that holds them all nice and secure. And you just want to make sure that that's wrapped nice and tight around. Making sure that you are taking note of your bigger design occasionally as you go. Is it balanced? Are the beads still on the inside? And just holding them there on the inside as well. I like to do a few loops around, so sort of circular loops around that sort of frame a bead. Kind of try and mix it up a little bit, the design the whole way around. So wrapping this firmer wire the whole way around the sun catcher does help to hold all the beads on as well, so that the beads are well attached even though they're on with a thinner wire underneath, but this one kind of helps to just give them another layer of protection. So at some stage, it doesn't particularly matter where you want to do it, but at some stage you're going to want to make a bigger loop on the outside of the circle, and this will be your hanging loop. So it will be where your sun catcher ends up hanging from, so it'll end up being the middle. So that's our hanging loop there. Just do a slightly bigger one so that you can see that that is actually the hanging loop. And just making sure it's wrapped around tightly on each side, nice and secure, and then continuing down the other side. I like to make sure that the start and finish of the wire is not actually right by the loop, just so that the loop is sort of still nice and secure and strong. and also so that your starting and finishing points are not obvious. So you can sort of cover them up a bit better if they're just randomly around the side somewhere. I'm just getting a bit shorter wire there, so I'll just wrap the end around in between the beads nice and tight. Snip my little tail off so I can poke the end in and crimp it down nice and tight. And then we're just going to attach a little bit more wire, so about 40 centimeters more wire, just to make sure I've got enough. So we just do that in the same way that we did the previous part as well, just securing it on there. Just making that little hook there and then wrapping it around on top of itself to hold it on there nice and secure. And then just wrapping around for the last couple of inches. It's a little hard to predict how long of wire you'll need. It's obviously better to have a little bit more than too little because you don't want to have to reattach wire all the time, but it also depends on how many times you actually wrap it around as to how much you need. And we don't want to waste a lot at the end either, so it's a bit of a guessing game, but hopefully my estimations help you get it pretty close, but every piece is a little bit different. So just nearing the end there, wrapping the last few little loops. And when you reach the end, you just want to wrap your wire around nice and tight. If you've got a little tail there, you can cut that off and then just crimping it down nice and tight or tucking it under so there's no sharp bits pointing out. That's your sun catcher part done. It's actually quite a simple design, so I'm hoping you guys are going to enjoy it. So now we just move on to our hanging part, and for this one we use the 26 gauge wire, and I cut about 25 inches depending on how long you want your sun catcher to be. If you know it's going to be hanging on something short, obviously you'd cut it a bit shorter. I've got 2 crimp beads here, and now you just loop your wire around the hanging loop that you made and put a crimp bead on with both ends of the wire inside the crimp bead. So just sliding that crimp bead on there and sorting out the length of your little loop that you want and crimping it down with your pliers. So you can cut that little tail off there as well, and it should be nice and secure on that crimper. So do the same on the top and make a little hanging loop. Obviously you can adjust your size for what you're going to be hanging it on. If it's just on a hook, it just needs a little part, but if it's on like a tree branch or something like that, you might need a little bit more. So just making sure both ends of the wire inside the crimping bead and crimping it down nice and tight. Cut that little tail off So these are actually quite versatile, and you could make them bigger, like bigger circles, or you could make a couple hanging off, or you could even get adventurous, make your own sort of circle shape or heart shape and do them that way, star shape. So for this one here, that's just an optional extra on the end if you wanted to hang a crystal. I've got some of my other tutorials for hanging crystals, so if you wanted to wire wrap one and just hang it in the middle, you can just do the same thing with the crimpers and using that 26 gauge wire hanging off to make a little attachment for your hanging crystal.